Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Homer. I'm the general partner of the venture department. We're an early stage venture capital firm focused on the space. And I am excited to moderate this panel today with some of the most important OGs from the custody space. So we've got, I'll quickly introduce the group, and then we're going to dive right in. We've got Marshall Beard, COO of Gemini, Nathan McCauley, CEO of Anchorage, and Mike Belshe, CEO of BitGo. And I want to, hopefully we can make this interactive. Hopefully we can make this sort of provocative. I think these are all folks who are like happy to be provocative, at least some of the time.
We'll do what we can.
So just as a panel, feel free to also interrupt, jump in with your own questions. I think this is a great time to have a conversation about custody because we have seen some monumental shifts in DC related to custody, right? So we've seen most notably, the first big shift we saw was the repeal of Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 issued by the SEC, which for those who may not follow staff accounting bulletins as closely made it basically cost prohibitive for companies subject to SEC oversight to custody assets. Probably many of you here are acutely aware of this and have experienced it in your own context. And then more recently, we saw the OCC repeal Interpretive Letter 1179, which said that nationally chartered banks had to go to the OCC for proactive approval before they could offer services in the digital asset space. So let's start with that. I mean, talk about kind of those shifts. What do they mean for your companies? I imagine they create some opportunities, but I also imagine they create more competition potentially in allowing traditional banks to enter the space. What do they mean for you guys, and what do those shifts mean for the broader industry? And whoever wants to start, just jump in.
I'll start on this one. These are two policy positions we took throughout the span of even as early in some cases 2023, but certainly throughout 2024, we called for both of these things to be repealed. We wrote a letter to the SEC calling for SAB 121 to be repealed, which was created this accounting guidance that locked out any other large banks from being able to custody digital assets. And a similar kind of the brother or sister to that was the OCC's Letter 1179, which basically put a chilling effect on the whole banking industry being able to come into custody of digital assets. I think it was surprising to a lot of people in the federal government that we took positions against this, because those two regulations were basically a lot of what caused a lot of growth in Anchorage over the last 4 years. Because basically every conceivable competitor got locked out of the market because of those. Large banks got locked out from being able to custody digital assets, and other crypto custodians and generally speaking, other people who wanted to use the OCC were also locked out of that. And because we have the only nationally chartered bank that allows people to custody digital assets, we got a tremendous amount of advantage from this. But basically we told people at SEC, people at the OCC, that these two particular provisions were basically un-American and unfair, and were wildly benefiting us and only us, and that just wasn't good governance, it wasn't good policy. And so I was very excited to see both of these come out, because if something is good for us only locally, it's not actually good for the whole industry at large. It's not good for institutional adoption of digital assets. So we were incredibly excited to see these repealed, and I think it's just the beginning of seeing more and more banks start to adopt digital assets, starting to see more of them start to come in. For us, it was a particularly good timing that on Friday, SAB 121 was repealed, saying, hey, the Staff Accounting Bulletin got repealed a few weeks before that. The OCC said, hey, banks can come in and start to work with digital assets on Friday. And that Wednesday, we announced that we're working with one of the largest Wall Street firms, Cantor Fitzgerald, on a Bitcoin financing program. And so they are going to be extending credit against Bitcoin, that Bitcoin all being held at Anchorage Digital Bank. And so I think this is going to form the nucleus of the way that large financial institutions start to come into the digital asset ecosystem. No longer will they be looking at like, hey, how do we become a custodian? How do we become the custodian ourselves? We'll leave that to the specialists. We will partner with folks like Anchorage Digital Bank in order to be able to bring those products to market. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of what is going to be a real trend in that area.
Nathan, when you say work with you, is that like through sub-custodial relationships, or what type of opportunities does that open up for you?
I think it's going to be every mix and mingle of what that looks like. In the case of Cantor working with us, clients are going to dual onboard. They're going to onboard to Anchorage, hold their Bitcoin with us, and onboard to Cantor, and then get the leverage through the program at Cantor. This will be, I think, pretty common because it's going to be, this configuration is going to be easiest to get to market for large financial institutions. But over time, I think there will be things where Bitcoin and other digital assets are going to be integrated into the wealth management programs at some of the large banks who have private wealth management, ultra high net worth individuals who already have crypto positions that they would like to bring into the fold, bring into the accounting systems at the banks. And then I think that's just like kind of the first things that we'll see here. Not to say anything of what's going to happen around stablecoins, and the whole stablecoin market is going to get unlocked as we start to look through the legislation passing there. Matt, I'm getting way ahead of myself, and you shouldn't cut me off because I know we got entire topics to go into on this, but it's incredible.
We'll get to that for sure. Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I can just add a second. It's obviously very positive from the policy side, but from like the business side, I don't think it changes too much, except it opens up more partnership opportunities in distribution. Some banks are going to want to try to build and do custody themselves, which is completely fine, and I applaud that. But others are going to trust experts, and it doesn't change our business models, right? Which at the end of the day is keeping digital assets safe. I think that's what the firms on this stage do the best in the whole entire world, and so very positive development, and I think it just opens up more kind of distribution and access.
What would it take for a bank to build what you guys have built? I mean, because I'm sure a lot of banks are thinking, do we build, do we buy, do we partner? And like, building's probably not so simple, right? I mean, what
Well, look, we've been working on this for 10 years now, a little over actually. There's a lot that has to change, right? So these are bearer instruments, and banks aren't traditionally holding bearer instruments. So there's a lot of technology that goes behind it. I do think we're going to see a lot of additional adoption from banks. Actually, one of the first unlocks is going to be more on the cash side, like what Nathan talked about, where Cantor is now able to make cash available to those that hold large amounts of Bitcoin. By the way, BitGo may end up with some of its assets. We have a fairly healthy Bitcoin balance sheet. We're looking for cash. We may end up with some of our Bitcoin at Anchorage in order to facilitate that, obviously.
Happy to help.
I mean, look, this is the way the traditional finance world works, right? You have financial institutions that are both clients and competitors. And I think it's a sign of a healthy time. All the cash coming back into the ecosystem from banks that previously just simply couldn't bank crypto companies is now here. So anyway, there's a lot to go. Back to your question, though, in terms of building, look, there's 10 years of work that we've done in terms of how you manage this asset class. Many of those banks are coming to us for how do they do sub-custody. Sometimes they're coming to us and say, can we use your technology? We provide both of those options. We're having a lot of conversations about that right now. And then others are going to try to build it themselves. I think similar to when we moved into the cloud, banking infrastructure had a hard time moving into the cloud until long after everybody else already had. The same thing's going to happen a little bit with key management, which is a reluctance to use external folks. In the case of BitGo, we have a better than on-premise key management. We do a hybrid key management. You have keys on your premise. It's in your control. We can't move it without you. And yet you also have the ability to have BitGo as a co-signer with all the security that goes with that. So all the banks are coming in right now for sure. At least they're scrambling to figure out what their strategies are.
One last sort of policy question, then we'll talk more about kind of product stuff. But I mentioned SAB 121, Interpretive Letter 1179. Are there any other kind of big blockers? And I know you guys are all sort of active in conversations in DC. Are there any other big blockers that you expect or hope will go away? Any guidance from other regulators like the FDIC, for example? Or do you think that those are the two big ones and now we can sort of move forward?
So I think those were the ones that were easiest to kind of just reverse course in a kind of personnel as policy kind of a dimension. I think the next step really starts to look like passing legislation. And there's two bills that are going to be super important. The first one, and the one that seems like it's the first priority, is stablecoins, as we mentioned earlier. And the second one is a market structure bill. There's still a lot of sticky wickets in terms of who does what in the federal government. Our decentralized, almost blockchain-esque federal government in terms of distribution of power means that we have about a dozen federal regulators, and it's not always exactly clear who does what when, particularly when you introduce this question of what asset categories are there, what jurisdictions those fall under. This stuff needs to get worked out, and I think that's like the second priority out of the administration after that. I will say, Mike and I were both at the White House for the roundtable that they had, and I was pretty heartened that they started with the opening comment from David Sachs was, we're going to solve stablecoins, we're going to establish the SBR, we're going to figure out market structure. So don't come here and tell me anything else about what you want on that. Tell me what's next. What are the additional ideas that are needed? What else needs to get solved beyond kind of getting those permanent legislative wins? And I thought that was very promising. It's not as if this is just promises made, promises kept, but it's promise made, promises kept, and more goodies coming after that. And so I think that's going to be really exciting.
I think the biggest change actually is really just the attitude. There is now a set of regulators in place that are ready to help this entire industry figure out how to get regulated in a way that doesn't harm innovation too much and is going to be welcoming into regulation. So you've heard for the last 4 years complaints where industry is saying, how do we get in? How do we do what you need us to do? Just tell us what to do. And they said, oh, fill out a form. And of course, we all knew that that was a fiction. So at this point, look, I think that's all gone. We now have regulators that are actually ready and willing to help. They actually have big ambitions. As Nathan said, I don't know, the market structure bill is a lot. We'll see if it can get all the way through. I guess my biggest concern is that none of us is as dumb as all of us. There's a lot of people vying for a little piece of something, and we could get something very complex if we're not careful.
I actually think that on the SEC website now, you actually can click a button and come in and meet them.
Progress.
All right, so let's pivot a little bit and talk about kind of product and innovation, but feel free to kind of come back to policy space as well as we do that. So for people who maybe don't follow like the latest developments in custody, like what is the state of art in custody today? What have been kind of the most interesting developments over the last year, whether that's new technology or product or business relationships? Like, how does it look different now than maybe like 3 years ago within your organizations?
All right, I'm happy to go. Let's see. When we started 10 years ago, actually we weren't really even talking about regulated custody. In fact, there's a lot of people that still don't use regulated custody. They use combinations of technology, self-custody, whatnot. For businesses, it's just kind of a matter of fact. You're holding other people's money. There has to be a higher bar. Of course, you need to be using some sort of a regulated custody in that form. But at the bottom layer, the wallets are more or less going to free. There's been a lot of questions about when do things get commoditized in custody. This is largely derived from the traditional financial world where you can swap out State Street and BNY and it's difficult to tell the difference. However, in crypto, find any two custodians that are alike. You can't find them. Everybody's different technology, different regulatory, different services on top. And at this point, what we're working on is really fleshing out the services on top of custody with the aim of making, the wallets are free almost already. Custody moves to free with support for all of the chains, and then the services is actually where we start to make money. So we maintain all of that technology, deep foundation of security at the bottom, and yet are able to provide a quality service that's much more exciting to clients.
I think from our side, maybe two ways to think about it, like the product side and the commercial side. From the commercial side, the approval and the launch of the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs have been, additive, right? There's been tens of billions of dollars of inflow. They are going to custodians like ours. And then on the product side, just two kind of main things that I think about. One is staking from custody, which is quite interesting. We provide staking to validators from our cold storage for a public ETF issuer, which is really interesting development there. So staking is interesting from the custodian side. And the other is probably MTC technology, multi-party computational technology. So we've rolled that out for internal transfers, and we look at that for commercialization too. So kind of staking is quite interesting, MPC, and then obviously the ETFs have been, on the commercial side, a boon.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the custody in traditional assets is relatively straightforward. Once you hold a Ford stock, you can hold a GM stock, you can even hold a Tesla stock. It all works very, very straightforwardly. In crypto, this is not the case. In crypto, each chain requires a net new integration that takes time, attention, and careful consideration to get integrated. And then once it's integrated, you actually want to do stuff with it. Whether that's the traditional financial verbs like buy, sell, leverage, collateralize, settle. From your custodian, you want to be able to do all that stuff, but you also want to be able to stake. You want to be able to participate in DeFi. You want to be able to vote in the networks. And so the level of complexity is really kind of deep and wide across the asset base, which I think is another reason that we're increasingly seeing that banks and financial institutions are choosing to part with digital asset custodians. To your earlier question, Matt, around what does it look like to succeed as a digital asset custodian in a traditional financial institution, my personal view is that what Fidelity pulled off is a modern business miracle. Their project at Fidelity started roughly the same time as Anchorage's did, and they have a working business in Bitcoin that they have built up over the last 7 or 8 years. Now, the issue there is that it's a Bitcoin business. It is not a crypto business. It is not a multi-asset business at this point. And I think there's a real.
Oh, I think they have Ethereum.
They do have Ethereum. They do not have Ethereum staking. And so once you start thinking about like, okay, what does it actually take to manage the complexity of digital assets across the entire spectrum of what's going to be interesting here? This is not going to be a single asset game. This is going to be an infinite asset game. This is what's making it even more clear that partnership with tech firms that allow you to hold the asset securely and actually meaningfully use it on a time horizon that is measured ideally in minutes, because this is how fast this industry moves, rather than hours or sometimes days to get assets out of cold storage. This is what ends up being necessary to really build the institutional offering that the world demands.
And I think only Fidelity has kind of pulled it off, right? Is any other bank?
Oh yeah, it's a miracle. It's truly incredible, but I don't think anybody else has a single Bitcoin under custody.
Yeah, not proprietary.
Right.
Where
I
do
think
you?
we saw NASDAQ announce that they wanted to be a custodian. They pulled that right last year.
Part of that's the power of private companies, right? So Fidelity's privately owned. The public companies have had a hard time, especially SAB 121. Threw them all way back for a loop.
Yeah, I think one of the things we found is we started working with some big banks, and if any of you are in here from a big bank, my general impression is what happens is there's about a 2-year period where it looks like a good idea to get into crypto, and then the whole market tanks, and everyone loses interest, loses focus, and is like, oh, maybe my career would be better suited in AI. So what happens is these teams that have been put together have massive retention problems. Those massive retention problems mean that the product never ships. All the people that were good in those teams go join our companies, and then you never kind of get there. This is why I'm saying that like this crop, the smart Wall Street people will choose to partner, because if you want to get something done on a time horizon where you can actually get something done, partnership is a must. And I think that's the real lesson that was learned from kind of the previous vintages of these projects. And now we're really seeing Cantor lead the way there. And I think that notion is going to be really contagious moving forward.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because I think there are a lot of banks wondering, like, feeling like they need a strategy for this space, right? They need a strategy for stable coins or for crypto or digital assets or tokenization. What's your advice, all of you, for like what banks should be doing? I mean, they should be working with you guys, obviously, but like, what advice would you give to a bank? Just generally.
Is this where we shill our own products? Look, this is what BitGo's whole thesis was from the beginning. Everything we have is API driven, so our clients can partner with us. We can hold full custody, we can hold self-custody, and they hold the keys, but they get full flexibility. They get the full repertoire of coins. One of the things we've worked on over the last few years is really amping up our ability to hit all of the coins. People don't realize it, but BitGo's got better coverage of the top 100 coins than any of the other wallet providers, including Fireblocks, which has traditionally been known to be the fastest. So anyway, you can come to us, you can get all of that. Another thing I think banks should be looking at heavily is true cold storage. True cold storage is always offline with the actual keys, certainly for large amounts of money, if the Bybit hack didn't help educate that like this stuff has to be offline, then I don't know what will. By the way, some people think that Bybit was a cold storage. I would argue it was not. Yes, they had cold storage ledger devices, but they were using a online UI that was completely online. And it was that part, of course, which was breached, leading to the failure. If they had had a true cold storage system, I don't think they would have had the same result. Of course, there's always a coulda, woulda, shoulda on this. Security goes deep. Anyway, banks, I think, should be looking for the utmost care in security, just because they're going to quickly attract a lot of value.
Yeah, I'd say just like thinking about what's happened in DC over the last several weeks. Two things that kind of come to mind as I think about how should banks be thinking about this. The first one is Secretary Treasury Bessent. It said this is on White House's Twitter page right now. X page. Secretary Bessent said, "We're going to spread the U.S. dollar globally, and we're going to do that with stablecoins." So this is not even a crypto-related thing. This is the core strategic policy of the United States is to spread dollar dominance for the next century with stablecoins. And so stablecoins are already taking up more than half of the transactional volume within blockchains, and that is a small story compared to what the administration is currently presenting. So this cannot be ignored. So once the stablecoin bills pass, I think it is just going to open up a tremendous amount of opportunity that we can't even really predict right now. And you have literally the White House saying, this is the way we're going to combat BRICS. This is how we're going to expand the reach of the U.S. dollar. This is, in a sense, this century's manifest destiny. Okay, so that's thing one. Thing two is Bitcoin. The White House has established a strategic Bitcoin reserve. They've decided that, number one, we're going to enact a policy where, at the very least, we hold any of the Bitcoin that gets seized through law enforcement action of the federal government, in many cases, state governments. And so we're gonna hold on to that, and then develop budget-neutral ways to acquire more Bitcoin. What I'm about to say is like a little bit crazy, but this is like literally what they're saying. Both David Sachs,
The crazier, the better. So
David Sachs and Bo Hines. This is not me, but David Sachs, crypto czar, Bo Hines. I think Bo was here today. Yeah, both of them called Bitcoin the Immaculate Conception. Okay, so these guys are literally saying that Bitcoin is Jesus, and stablecoins are the path for dollar dominance. You cannot ignore this. You absolutely cannot ignore the messages that are coming out of DC right now, and there is no option to put your head in the sand. There's no option to ignore this. Everyone needs to be developing a plan and a strategy around this, and looking for ways to execute and execute quickly. I would posit that if you're executing slower than the federal government, you need to take stock of what's going on. And the bad news is the federal government is executing very, very fast right now.
But what is the role, do you think, with Bitcoin, for example? I mean, is the starting place for banks just to offer custody for their customers, for example, in Bitcoin? I mean, I guess that's sort of like a starting place. And with stablecoins, it's like serving companies in that space, providing ACH service. Is it sort of basic?
I mean, at one level, I would say this is a question that defies synthesis. Every single bank has a different set of strengths, has a different set of client base that is important to them. There are transactional banks, there's retail banks, there are regional banks. Places that we're seeing interest is in banks' prime offerings. The prime desks want to start treating Bitcoin as collateral as part of their lending operations. This is a very natural one. There are many banks that have private wealth groups where a bunch of the private wealth, they're high net worth individuals, they're billionaires, they're millionaires that are in those private wealth groups, already have Bitcoin that is held somewhere else. Thinking about ways to integrate that into the private wealth offering makes a ton of sense. Some of them are starting to issue ETFs. I think we're going to see a real renaissance in the amount of ETFs that are coming through. We had to like nearly pull teeth to get the Bitcoin ETFs out, and those were incredible. Those are the fastest growing ETFs of all time. The Ethereum ETF is a really kind of a joke of a product because it doesn't even let you do staking in it. So imagine like an income, like a bond ETF that doesn't let you collect the coupons. How ridiculous would that be? Well, that's what we have with the ETH ETF, and it is the third fastest growing ETF of all time, only behind IBIT and FBIT. So the only ETFs that have ever gone faster than this hamstrung ETH ETF are the Bitcoin ETFs. And so any of these, private wealth, Bitcoin as collateral to be lending against, issuing of ETFs, all totally viable. In terms of stablecoins, this is a big one. I mean, I think like people need to be having board level discussions about what actually happens with stablecoins. How does stablecoins affect the deposit business at the large banks? What does it actually mean to start thinking about how are these, is it a transactional mechanism? Is it a deposit mechanism? Should we be collateral banks for issuance of digital stablecoins? I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity for real creativity to happen there.
So let's talk about stablecoins for a little bit. I mean, I think it's one of the breakout successes, maybe the biggest, right, outside of Bitcoin for crypto so far. It's 1% of M2 money supply. The volume of stablecoin volume, I think, now exceeds that of Visa and MasterCards. I mean, the growth is pretty incredible and impressive. What are you guys doing in that space, if anything? What is the role of custodians in that space? And I mean, connected to that, I guess, is the question, like, do you, I want to get your thoughts at some point on, like, what, if you guys, how are you thinking about it? Are you focused just on custodying digital assets, or do you think about, as sort of these two worlds collide, also custodying, securities or T-bills or other sorts of assets? But maybe just start talking about that. Yeah.
Well, let's see. On stablecoins, everybody on the stage, Marshall is responsible for Gemini's stablecoin that's been out for how many years?
5, probably.
5 years. All right. Look, I think stablecoins are the bank that you wish you had but never had. People sometimes don't understand the difference between a depository and a custodian. And we have reserve banks. People don't like them. People like to get yield. You used to be able to get some yield out of your bank. But what does a stablecoin give you? First off, it's a one-to-one backed asset, unlike the banks, which are fractional reserve. It gives you a yield, which is risk-free, right? Unlike banks, which give you 0.1%. It's usable 24/7 all around the globe with no friction, which banks can't do either. So stablecoins by themselves are the new banks. Like, you actually don't need banks for the new banks, which is an interesting place that we're going. So banks will transform. Look, lending is still out there. Things need to happen. Obviously, mortgages used to happen through banks. Now those are securitized. We'll see how banks transform and react. But they got a lot of change to happen. I think, in terms of like the things Nathan was describing a few moments ago, there's digital asset companies like BitGo. You can come and do all of those things today, right? So a lot of the partnerships that are going to happen with traditional finance is going to bring cash flows into the digital asset ecosystem. And then we're going to see who wins. Is it going to be the fast-moving digital asset companies, or is it going to be the incumbents with the massive distribution channels? I think the days of regulatory capture, a little bit, I wouldn't say over. I think that's too much, but it's definitely lessened with this new administration. So finally, you mentioned what's going to happen in terms of converging with the rest of the world. Look, Larry Fink has also said, like everything is going to be on chain. It gives you a better product. So the idea that all of the securities of the world are going to have digital forms, of course it's true. There's a lot of people working on that right now, many at this conference. I think it's quite likely you will just see the convergence of all of this into the digital native companies, and we'll see how the incumbents can transform. I think they will have a role, but it's going to change.
I think my answer might be a little different from these guys because Gemini is a stablecoin issuer, the Gemini dollar. We're also an exchange, spot exchange. We have an offshore derivatives exchange. We are stablecoin agnostic. The thing with being an exchange, though, and supporting multiple stablecoins is it fractionalizes liquidity. Most of our global liquidity and order books against the dollar, and so the problems we face with lots of different stablecoins, which I think we are in a multi-stablecoin world forever. I think banks, you'll see, will have their own types of stablecoins. Like, it's just moving money faster. And so, but back to like the exchange part, I mean, like the killer feature is some sort of like pooled liquidity mechanism where, you know, you can deposit any stablecoin that's like approved within the Gemini listing framework on any chain, and then access global liquidity on the exchange against our dollar order books, and then withdraw any stablecoin that we support on any chain. So come to Gemini with 10 USDC on Solana, you have 10 on your account, you trade against our order books, you have all the liquidity, and then you withdraw 10 Tether on Tron, something like that. And so there's a lot of treasury management behind that to make that work feasible, and there's some cost associated with it to not make it perfect. But we're stablecoin agnostic. I think stablecoins are a killer app, a killer feature. Like, we see that today. I think I heard Paulo from Tether speak last week, and he mentioned kind of thinking about Tether as like a national security interest for the U.S. He paved this picture, that. Basically, like, China has like been selling their treasuries, right? They went from 4 billion to 700 million today, and Tether's at 150 million as like a net buyer. And like, you go to places where Tether's thrived, which is emerging markets like Africa, Latin America, and like, you see these like new highways being built in Africa, and it's a sign on the road that says, a gift from the People's Republic of China. And they're buying gold, they're selling treasuries. If BRICS comes out with some sort of digital dollar and forces all the ports or something in Africa to only take that hurts US dollars, that lowers treasury. So Tether's actually like a good thing for US dollar growth globally, and so I thought that was a great point as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with Paolo on that point, that the spread of Tether has been probably one of the better manifestations of an export of U.S. dollar dominance globally, especially in a world where increasingly driven by things like China's Belt and Road Initiative, ports, libraries. I mean, you visit some of these developing countries, and some of the road signs are in Mandarin, and so in a large way, there's very little play that the U.S. has had, and in some ways have abdicated some of our responsibility, or what we previously thought of as a responsibility. So the dollar is really in a little bit of a precarious position there. I think we take for a given that the dollar enjoys a sense of dominance. Jokingly, in crypto, I think sometimes in crypto people call it the least bad fiat currency. I mean, it's no Bitcoin, but it's pretty good. The dollar is really great. It's probably the greatest product that has come out of America, and we have an opportunity with stablecoins to take that and increase the reach far beyond where it currently goes. Right now, kind of the end state for dollars tends to be foreign correspondent relationships in some local banks around the world, whereas stablecoins immediately have global applicability across the entire globe, can be a net new buyer of treasuries. And I think a Tether right now is probably already like ranked 8th in terms of largest treasury buyers in the world, and its market cap is still relatively small. Only 1% of M1 have an opportunity to get it into hundreds of billions, if not trillions. And at that kind of scale in the stablecoin market, there's room for way more than just one issuer, than just one player in that. And so when I mentioned that I think this is a really profound opportunity, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Is like, what is the plan for spreading of the American financial instrument across the globe? And that responsibility has really been given to private industry, whether it's startups in crypto, whether it's the banks themselves. I think the stablecoin legislation is going to set kind of the starting gun for that set of innovation, and there's just a lot of opportunity there.
We've got about 5 minutes left. We haven't talked about DeFi yet, but what do you see as the intersection between DeFi and custody? I mean, it seems like we've seen products emerge that enable, customers sort of to move in and out seamlessly, right, of a QC context and sort of having their own control of the asset and being able to do whatever they want with it. How do you see that kind of intersection evolving over the next year or two?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one where it underscores the point, some of the points me and Mike were making earlier, where custody isn't just about holding the asset. If custody was just about holding the asset, I'd probably be doing something different with my life. Custody is about being able to hold the asset securely and do useful stuff with it. DeFi provides, I think, one of the most incredible mechanisms by which we can start to do things, where we've, over the last 100 years in financial infrastructure, built a whole set of services and regulatory wrappers to mediate the behavior of institutional players, of counterparties. So there are rules about how to lend, there's rules about how to market make, there's rules about how to run an exchange. And what DeFi says is, like, what if the rules of the road were just set in code, auditable by everyone, and available to everyone out of the box? And so this is a deeply contrarian view that is pretty incredible in its applicability to the world, but it doesn't let you really do much if you don't get access to it. If you can't meaningfully use, say, the Uniswap exchange, you can't use lending markets, you can't use all of those services that you want to use from the safety of your custodian, then you don't really get access to it. And in a weird sense, in 2017, part of the reason that I came into crypto custody was crypto at the time felt like a retail phenomenon. And more of that needed to be brought to institutions. That's where I feel like we are with DeFi right now. DeFi still is a retail-driven phenomenon, and safe, structured interfaces to that from qualified custody is going to be the mechanism by which institutions are allowed to come into that space and enjoy the benefits of those transparent, fair, and fundamentally more trustworthy setups.
Look, I think DeFi is the third great use case for digital assets so far. We had store of value with Bitcoin, payments and stable coins, and then DeFi. As Nathan said, we can take all that regulation and put it into code, and then actually your regulator becomes a code reviewer instead of somebody that has to constantly monitor every stockbroker's message that he ever sends in case he becomes corrupt, long later. Look, DeFi access is clearly going to be an important part. I think it takes a little bit longer. We were stalled out for the last 4 years. We had the SEC unclear about what's a security, what's not a security. This has held that whole sector back, and that's going to open up right now. And then anyone with institutional money is going to be looking for, well, how do I make sure I keep my balances safe and yet have access to DeFi? One other thing we'll see is look, we do wrap Bitcoin, $13 billion of value that's wrapped. We've got needs for cross-chain activity. There's a lot where custodians can play a role here, either through wrapped assets like that, or you can even imagine wrapped assets like equities and whatnot starting to show up into these products. Finally, making your money make you more money is what people really want. So the ability to put all of this stuff into a programmable form where you can use as collateral and start to really generate more advantage in a whole bunch of ways is what we're trying to get to.
Marshall, last word?
Yeah, sure. I think you can think of it two different ways, the institutional side, maybe the retail side. I think on the institutional side, it's still, not the easiest to use DeFi. You know, there's solutions and like Fireblocks and companies that kind of had this institutional grade way to access on-chain activity, but like moving size on-chain through your business is still somewhat scary and expensive. And then on the retail side, what you see with DeFi is like self-hosted wallets or non-custodial wallets, right? So people are downloading browser extensions or downloading apps and writing down seed phrases and, you know, accessing on-chain. It's still not perfect. There's no, you know, support desk for that when you send it, you know, off into the ether. And so, you know, I think user experience on both sides for both institutional and retail for DeFi is probably the most critical thing ever, making it super easy and secure to access, and that still, you know, has some work to do there.
Great. Well, I think we're at time. Thank you guys for joining me for this conversation, and please, audience, please join me in thanking the panel.